All the Young Dudes, James' Perspective by Staying Dreams. Chapter 6. First Year, Revenge. By Sunday evening, James found himself in a rather unfamiliar position. Actually, doing homework. It was the Transfiguration essay for McGonagall, a hefty 14 inches of parchment. Of course, Sirius had turned it into a competition, which made it far more entertaining than it had any right to be. Even if Sirius did end up winning, Peter had tried desperately to keep up, scribbling furiously like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, Remus had sprawled out in one of the Polish armchairs in the Gryffindor common room, observing them all with an air of detachment, as if the mere idea of homework was beneath him. James had to admit that once Sirius had busted him, his brain started wandering to far more important things. "So," he said, settling down his quirl with a flourish, "how are we going to get them back?" "Get who back?" Peter asked, not bothering to look up as he riffled through his notes. Honestly, sometimes it was like Peter needed a map to follow a conversation. "The Slytherins," James hissed, a bit exasperated. "Keep up, Pete." "Not all of the Slytherins?" Peter asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Only Snape and Mulciber, right?" "All of them," Sirius replied with a wicked grin, emerging from under the table, where he'd been rummaging. He handed Peter a piece of parchment. "This what you were looking for?" "Cheers," Peter said, visibly relieved. "I've nearly finished." Sirius turned his attention to Remus, who hadn't so much as glanced at the textbook lying open on the table in front of him. Remus had a funny relationship with schoolwork. James couldn't quite put his fingers on it. Not that James was particularly thrilled about the mountains of reading either, but at least his competitive streak kept him from ignoring it altogether. "Have you done it, Lupin?" Sirius asked, almost too casual. "Nah," Remus shrugged, not looking the least bit concerned. "Can't be bothered." Sirius frowned slightly. "Let us know if you need help." "You can copy mine if you want," James offered, pushing his essay across the desk. But Remus pushed it back with a scowl, his jaw clenched tight. "I'm fine. I'm not stupid." "No one said you were," James replied evenly, though he could feel Sirius's eyes on him. He knew that pushing Remus right now would only make things worse. The kid had walls up that even Sirius' charm couldn't breach. But James had a hunch that with a bit of time, Remus might just let them in. Remus exhaled sharply, relaxing his fist. We could put itching powder in their beds," he'd suggested, his tone light, but his eyes gleaming with mischief. James's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Now, this was new. He hadn't expected Remus to be the one to come up with something so deliciously clever. Or their clothes, if he could figure out who does the laundry anyway. James tilted his head, curious. Did Remus really not know about the house elves? But he decided not to mention it, not wanting to make Remus feel awkward. Instead, he focused on the idea, twirling his quill between his fingers. "I like it," he said thoughtfully. "But does anyone actually have any itching powder?" The other three shook their heads. "Could order some from Zonko's," Sirius suggested. "If you let me borrow your all, James. Mom confiscated mine after the sorting." James nodded. His awl could do with the extra exercise anyway, the lazy bird, but he couldn't help feeling impatient. Waiting for an order to arrive didn't exactly fit with the kind of immediate payback he was after. "I suppose," he muttered. "Wish we could do it sooner, though. Strike while the iron's hot and all that." "Don't need to buy itching powder," Remus interjected suddenly, sitting up straighter. "Do you reckon they have rose hips in the greenhouse?" Peter finally looked up from his homework, nodding. "Yeah, they use them in healing potions. For arthritis, I think." Remus's face lit up with excitement, and James couldn't help but feel a thrill at seeing this side of him. The hairs inside make you itch really badly, Remus explained, words tumbling out faster now. Matron, the woman who runs the children's home. She grows them, and if you get in trouble, she makes you seed them without gloves on. James shuddered at the thought. That's awful, he said, imagining the torment. Brilliant idea, though, Sirius beamed. Next break, we'll nick a load of them. Then we can seed them, with gloves on, mind, and sneak them into the Slytherin's baths. Perfect! How are we going to get into the Slytherin dorms? Peter asked, having finally finished his work. James glanced at his trunk, a slow grin spreading across his face as he remembered what his dad had let him bring to school. Leave that to me, he said, smirking with a glint of mischief. They sent Peter to collect the rosehips, mostly because he was the only one who hadn't managed to land himself in detention yet. Peter's spotless record meant he was off the professor's radars for now, one of the few advantages of being the least noticeable of the group. It was perfect, really. James knew Peter was good at sneaking around, even if the others didn't quite appreciate his talents. So, when Peter returned from the greenhouse after morning break with a jar full of rosehip seeds, James couldn't help but give him a big brotherly hug. Nicely done, Pete, James grinned, ruffling Peter's hair, making it stick up even more. Peter beamed under the praise, cheeks flushing pink, but he still looked rather proud of himself. James felt a rush of affection. Peter wasn't the bravest or the most talented, but he was theirs, and he'd done his part brilliantly. They all quickly locked themselves away in their shared bathroom to start seeding the bots. Remus, as always, took the lead with anything even vaguely related to dangerous plants. He was the only one who had bothered to pay attention in herbology beyond the basic "don't touch this or you'll lose a finger" instructions. Under his watchful eye, they pulled on the heavy dragon hide gloves, careful not to let the seeds or final hairs touch their skin. Sirius plopped himself down next to James on the cold tile floor, and they started working side by side, synchronized without even needing to talk about it. It always felt like that with Sirius, like they were tuned into the same wavelength. I can't wait to see the looks on their faces, Sirius said, his grin widening as he worked. His blue eyes sparkled with that familiar mischievous glint, the one that always made James feel like they were on the brink of something brilliant. James looked up and grinned back, feeling a rush of excitement in his chest. He couldn't quite believe his luck in finding a friend like Sirius. They'd only known each other for 3 weeks, but it felt like they'd been mates forever, both born into magic, both from wealthy families, both completely mental about Quidditch. It was like looking in a mirror, and it wasn't just that. They were already building a reputation, the two of them. Sometimes James felt like a king with Sirius by his side. Everyone listened when they talked, laughed at their jokes, and the best part, no one even cared when they lost Gryffindor house points, which was happening more and more frequently. Sirius chuckled, breaking James out of his thoughts. Still don't know how we're going to get into the Slytherin dorms, though. Even Peter isn't that sneaky. He shot James a meaningful look, the kind that said he knew James was up to something and was desperate to find out what. James just smirked, feeling a thrill at keeping his master plan a secret. He'd been dying to tell them, but the anticipation of their reactions was too good to spoil. Let me worry about that, he said, trying to sound casual. Sirius rolled his eyes, in that exaggerated way he had, like he was too cool to care, but actually bursting with curiosity. It took everything James had not to burst out laughing. They finished up by storing the seeds and fine hairs in an extra jar, making sure they ate the leftover rose hips over the week. James was adamant that they left no evidence behind. He could already imagine the chaos they were going to cause, and he wasn't going to let something silly like forgotten rose hips spoil their fun. It was a Tuesday evening when they finally got their chance. James had decided that they have to pull it off before everyone headed to bed. He'd also come up with the brilliant idea of going to the Slytherin dorms separately, so they wouldn't get spotted together and rumbled. Leading the charge, plotting everything out, it made him feel like the hero in some grand adventure story. The excitement was almost too much. At dinner, Sirius was shoveling down his food like a madman. Meanwhile, Remus was still calmly helping himself to seconds, and Peter, though finished, looked positively green with nerves. Naturally, Sirius was the first to stand, sauntering out of the hall, like he didn't have a care in the world. James waited a bit, then followed at a discreet distance, trying not to make it too obvious. They made their way to the girls' loo on the second floor. According to Remus, there was a secret passage there that led to the dungeons. Pure genius, really. As he neared the loo, he saw Sirius slip inside. James slowed down, deciding to hang back for a few moments to avoid raising any suspicion. He could hear a girl crying on the other side of the door. Remus had warned them about that. Apparently, no one used this lavatory because of the gloomy ghost that haunted it. After waiting what felt like a reasonable amount of time, James slipped inside as well. When he opened the door, he found Sirius pacing in front of it like a caged animal. "Well, someone's eager," James quipped. Closing the door quietly behind him, Sirius flashed him a grin, all teeth. "Do you reckon we'll have to wait for Pete to hurl when he gets here? He was looking a bit peaky back there." "Nah, come on, Pete's a good sport," James said, though he felt a twinge of discomfort. He didn't much like it when Sirius made digs at Peter. They always made things a bit tense. Peter hadn't done anything to deserve it, really, even if James agreed with some of the jabs. They were unnecessary. He just wanted his mates to get along. By the time Remus and Peter arrived, Sirius was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Lead the way then, Lupin," James gestured grandly, trying to lighten the mood. But Sirius grabbed his arm, stopping him with a serious look. "Wait, show us what you're planning first." James smirked, feeling a surge of pride. He'd been dying to reveal his secret since Sunday. "Oh, okay then. Here, hold this," he said, thrusting the jar of rosehip seeds into Sirius's hands and pulling back his robes. He produced the cloak with a flourish. It was long, voluminous, and the finest thing he'd ever laid hands on, silvery grey and shimmering like something out of a dream. "No," Sirius breathed, eyes wide. "You haven't. Potter, you bloody haven't." James was grinning so widely he thought his face might split in two. He winked at them, then swept the cloak over his head, covering himself completely. He looked out through the thin fabric at his friends' astonished faces. "You jammy bastard!" Sirius whooped, unable to contain his excitement. "How come you never told me?" James felt a small stab of guilt. Maybe he should have mentioned it sooner. "You never told me either," Peter squeaked, looking slightly hurt. "And I've known you forever. Where did you get it?" James glanced between his two friends, suddenly feeling like he was walking a tightrope. They both seemed a bit competitive, and the last thing he wanted was for either of them to feel like he was playing favorites. He'd never do that. Honestly, he wasn't sure why he hadn't told Peter before. They hadn't really needed it until now. He pulled the hood of the cloak down so that his head appeared to float in mid-air, hoping it looked as cool as it felt. "Been in the family for years," he said triumphantly. "Dad let me bring it as long as I don't tell Mom." "Lucky git," Sirius muttered, reaching out to rub the invisible fabric between his fingers. James felt a swell of pride. Sirius was hard to impress, and here he was absolutely gobsmacked. "I reckon we can all fit under it," James said, pulling the cloak apart and raising his arms like a bat. "Come on, let's all get nice and cozy." It felt strangely comforting, shuffling underneath the cloak together. They waddled around the room a few times, testing how well they could move. Finally, trying not to giggle too much, the 4 invisible boys squeezed into the third stall from the left. Remus directed them, tapping the tiles to open up the floor and reveal the passageway. "How'd you find this, Remus?" James whispered, genuinely impressed. "It's genius." "You come out behind one of those rocks they hang on the walls in the dungeons," Remus explained. "I just looked behind it." "Do you mean a tapestry?" Peter asked. Bless him. James had noticed from the start that Remus came from a different background. The hand-me-down clothes, the well-worn books, the black eye, it was all a bit telling. He tried his best to explain things to Remus when he seemed out of the loop, but it was hard to keep track of what was foreign to him and what wasn't. James didn't know much about the mock world after all. Next to him, Remus stiffened at Peter's question, muttering, suppose so? "Shut up, Peter grew," Sirius snapped, shifting his weight. "Oi!" Remus hissed, shifting as well. "Bugger off!" "Sorry," Sirius yelped. "Meant to get Pete, not you." "Be quiet, all of you," James snapped, trying to keep order. "We're almost there." They waited in tense silence on their side of the tapestry, listening for any footsteps in the corridor outside. Once James was satisfied it was clear, they all clambered out of the passage. The dungeons were as cold and dreary as ever. There was a strange dripping sound issuing somewhere. James felt a surge of relief that he didn't have to live here. "Where's the entrance?" Sirius murmured. "Behind that wall," Remus pointed out, and James had to squint to see where he was aiming. It was just a plain brick wall. "How'd you know?" "I've seen them go in before," Remus said, a bit too nonchalantly for James's liking. Just how much time had Remus spent lurking down here? If it weren't for pranks, James wouldn't have set foot in these dungeons after all. No wonder the Slytherins always looked like they had a stick up their asses if these were their living conditions. "Do you know the password?" "Nope." "Damn. It's not coffee yet. Let's just wait." James nodded, even though he wasn't sure the others could see him. Sirius seemed tense next to him, breathing heavily as if he was hot. Peter kept shifting his weight nervously, and James put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, 2 seventh years came hurrying through. Sirius jerked his head up. James quickly realized it was the same 2 girls who had been harassing Sirius at the sorting ceremony. "Let's see the ring again, Bella," Mrs. Black pleaded with her older sister. James felt Sirius stiffen beside him, pressing himself back against the wall. Bellatrix preened, extending her bony fingers to show off an enormous silver and emerald engagement ring. Definitely not what James would have picked out for his future bride. Sirius had told him about Bellatrix's engagement to Rodolphus Lestrange, and then he'd spent a good 30 minutes moaning about the upcoming wedding. Narcissa squealed with delight, as if it was the first time she'd see the ring. "Gorgeous," she gushed. "Oh, I can't wait to get married." "Wait your turn," Bellatrix replied in that grating voice of hers. "Once Lucius has a better position in the ministry, I'm sure Mommy and Daddy will agree to the match." They were in front of the wall now. Bellatrix flipped her curly black hair over her shoulder. Eerily similar to Sirius's, James noted. It still blotched his mind that Sirius was related to these 2. Excluding their physical features, Sirius was as different from them as night and day. Sure, they shared the same posh accent and came from the same ridiculous wealth, but every way that mattered, Sirius was more like James. They might as well have been brothers. "Mundo sanguine," Bellatrix announced. The wall stood aside to let them in, and the 4 boys hurried after, slipping through just before it closed. James squinted as he tried to adjust to the dim, murky light of the Slytherin common room. The whole place had an unsettling vibe, like it belonged at the bottom of the ocean, which, in a way, it did. The windows peered out into the depths of the black lake, and even though it was late, James doubted the sun ever touched this place. The mere thought of being sealed off from sunlight made his chest tighten. Maybe it was his love for flying, the open sky above him, that made him feel so claustrophobic down here. The only light came from a low fire crackling in the hearth, its flames reflected in the dark, polished onyx and jade decorating the fireplace. The candelabras on the walls flickered weakly, casting strange, eerie shadows over a massive portrait of Salazar Slytherin himself. There was a reading alcove where a few students were hunched over books, and James found himself wondering how they could even make out the words in this gloom. The other students seemed just as uneasy, rooted to the spot, until James nudged them forward. They hesitantly made their way up a flight of stairs, hoping they were headed for the boys' dormitories. On their way, they passed Severus, who was hunched over in a corner, poring over his potions textbook with his greasy hair hanging in his face. When they reached the top of the stairs, they slipped into the first open door they found. A bedroom, thank Merlin. James threw off the cloak and rushed into the room, eager to get started. "Keep a lookout, Petey?" Peter nodded, scurrying to the doorway, where he glanced nervously over his shoulder every few seconds. Poor bloke looked like he was about to jump out of his skin. Catching a frown on Sirius's face, James gave him a playful nudge and grinned. "Reckon one of these is Snape's bat?" "This one might be," Sirius said, pointing to a bed with sheets that looked like they hadn't seen a wash in weeks. "Sheets look greasy enough." The four boys snickered, their tension easing just a bit. "Right, gloves on, lads," James whispered, unscrewing their jar of rose-hip seats. Remus and Sirius each slipped on a dragon-hide glove, grabbing handfuls of seeds and scattering them liberally into the bedclothes. "They'll see them," James hissed, his voice tightened with disappointment. The bright red seeds stood out starkly against the white sheets, even in the dim light. There was no way the Slytherins wouldn't notice them. "Well, they'll still get it on them trying to breath them out," Sirius offered, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Hang on," Remus trailed off, that familiar look of deep concentration on his face. James had learned that this expression meant Remus was thinking hard. With a small frown, Remus pulled out his wand, bit his lip, and waved it gingerly over the bed. He had just covered it in seeds. "Obfuscate," he whispered. The seeds vanished completely. James blinked, then took off his glasses and wiped them with his robe, just to be sure he wasn't seeing things. But no, the seeds were still gone when he put them back on. "Blimey," James stirred in awe. "How'd you do that? Flitwick hasn't taught us that charm yet, has he? Was it in the reading?" "Nah," James shrugged like it was nothing. "I saw some 50-years doing it yesterday on some sweets they bought in the village. It's not hard to copy." James and Sirius immediately tried to mimic the charm on their own piles of seeds. It didn't work the first time or the second, but after the third attempt, James managed to vanish most of his. "You'd better do it, Lupin, or we'll be here all night," he said, trying to sound cheerful despite his mild frustration. "Yes, please hurry up," Peter hissed from the doorway, his face as white as nearly headless neck. Sirius had another go, but when he couldn't quite manage it, he let Remus take over. "You're going to show me exactly how to do that as soon as we're back on neutral territory," Sirius said. Remus nodded, looking slightly puzzled. He didn't seem to understand why they were struggling so much. "Next room," James announced, leading the way back to the corridor. "Do we have to?" Peter whined, hopping from foot to foot like he needed the loo. "Isn't that enough?" "Not even close," Sirius laughed, tossing his hat. "What if we haven't even got Snape's bed yet? We have to get them all, Pete. Are you with us or not?" "All the boys, anyway," James added as they entered the next bedroom. "I don't fancy our chances getting into the girls' dorms. Remember what happened to Dirk Creswell last week?" They worked quickly, managing to get into every single boys' room, even the last one, where 3 6-years were already asleep. Even Sirius had balked at going in there, but Remus was practically buzzing with excitement. He threw on the invisibility cloak and slipped into the room, himself scattering the worships over the pillow of the slumbering boys. By the time they finished, it was late, and more Slytherins were making their way upstairs for bed. They had to creep carefully down the stairs, pressing themselves against the wall as students passed. It was slow going, but they managed to sneak back through the common room unseen, slipping out into the corridor beyond. As James had instructed, they kept as quiet as possible until they were within spitting distance of Gryffindor Tower. Finally, it was safe to remove their cloak. "Widdershins!" they chanted together at the fat lady, who swung open to let them in. The warm, bright Gryffindor common room felt like heaven after the cold, dark dungeons. They all collapsed onto the nearest sofa, grinning like mad. Frank Longbottom looked up from where he was organizing his revision notes at a nearby table. "Cutting it fine, lads," he said, though his tone was more amused than accusing. "Been somewhere interesting?" Peter looked like he might spill the beans right then and there, but James waved a hand dismissively. "Library, obviously." Frank shook his head, though he was smiling. "I'm sure I'll hear about it soon enough." "I wish I could be there when it all kicks off," Sirius whispered, his eyes practically glowing with excitement. "And wish even more we could have got my cousins." "It's just the beginning, Sirius, mate," Remus replied, slapping the blue-eyed boy's knee. "Between the 4 of us, I reckon we could go even bigger next time. Excellent first mission, man." Peter, who had been quiet for most of the night, let out a small whimper. "First mission?"